This is what I call the Oikos challenge, and the question we ask is, so who's in your world? We want to start with point number one. It's a challenge to make a list. The first step in the process of changing the world is framing the world. So ask yourself the question, who makes up your Oikos? Some of you are already thinking, but I don't have any non-Christians in my Oikos. Well, that means you've been a Christian a while, but the truth is we all do still have non-believers in our Oikos, but most of us haven't been trained to give them much of a second thought. So before you go any further with this idea, you need to sit down by yourself, maybe with your spouse or even with your entire family, and make a list of everyone who's in your Oikos. If you have elementary-age children at home, you have an advantage because they have an uncanny way of helping you identify the people who should be on your list. But what about Jimmy's parents? You sit on the sidelines twice a week for soccer practice and then again for the games. And your response is, oh, I didn't think of them. And therein lies the problem. You didn't think of them. I wonder if Zacchaeus was on anybody's Oikos list. Like many of the stories we read in the Bible, his would have had a backstory, and that story's never been told, and actually may never be known. But could Zacchaeus have come to Christ because of someone in his Oikos? You know, statistically, there's a 95% chance that he did, and this is my point. Everybody will have a Zacchaeus or two on their Oikos list. In fact, maybe you're the Zacchaeus on someone else's list. Did you ever think about that? Regardless of how difficult some people may be to love, love never gives up because God's purpose is always greater than the difficulty. We do not get to select our Oikos. God does that for us. We simply identify the people whom He has already supernaturally and strategically placed in our lives. You might not even like some of the people in your Oikos. Perhaps you wish you could trade them to someone else's Oikos, maybe for 2 draft picks and a player to be named later. Remember though, this exercise is not just to identify your Oikos, but to also chart a new trajectory for your own spiritual growth. The more you grow in grace, the better chance you'll have of reaching your Oikos with that same grace. Also keep in mind that your list will evolve over time. Our Oikos is never set in stone. It's always fluid, constantly changing. We live in a very transient society where people always seem to be moving to new neighborhoods, finding new jobs, changing schools, and of course, we eventually all die. We never know how long any individual will be a part of our Oikos, so we don't have any time to waste. Each of us might know a lot more people than we can effectively list on an Oikos card, but at any given point in time, there seems to always be at least 8 to 15 of them whom God has placed on the front burner of our lives. So make a list. Then number 2, after you've made the list, pray for everyone on the list every day. Technically, not everyone in your Oikos is going to be a non-believer, since the extended household included everyone who is at the very least getting to know you pretty well. But each of those familiar faces will fall into one of 3 categories. Your list will probably include believers who are serious about their walk with Christ, so pray that they'll stay that way. Your list will probably also include some believers who've wandered away from the faith, so your prayer for them is that they will reconnect with Jesus and reignite their spiritual journey. And then there will usually be non-believers who simply need Jesus, and you know how to pray for them. But regardless of who makes up the list, you're praying that God would help them recognize their need for Him, and every time you pray for one of them, also pray for your own personal growth, that you would be prepared to respond to their needs and be the kind of Christian who can, as Peter said, give an answer to everyone who asks you. Give the reason for the hope that you have with gentleness and respect. And then number 3, invest time and resources to develop those relationships. Now that you've painted the target, zero in. Even a quick glance at the list you're generating will give you a sense of the specific direction God is moving. And those 8 to 15 names, they reflect hundreds more who will soon have the chance to know Jesus as well. Embracing the Oikos principle requires the desire to recognize where God is moving and then follow Him. In a few minutes, you're going to hear about the importance of inviting your Oikos to church, but an invitation doesn't go very far until the investment has already been made. The non-believers in your community already think 2 things are true about you and all of us Christians. They think we hate homosexuals and they think we're judgmental. And the only way we're going to change their minds is by spending some quality time with people like us. Simply inviting them to church won't change that perception. This is where your investment will make a huge difference in the bottom line. And then number 4, invite them to church regularly. Remember, the church is not a building, so anywhere the ecclesia gathers, church services are being held. An invitation to church could mean an invitation to a variety of settings. Maybe to an outreach event, maybe to an auditorium for a worship service, maybe just to somebody's house for a small group experience, or even a restaurant for a private cup of coffee, maybe to a church or a community service opportunity. I don't know. Most Christians would say they've always wanted their oikos to come to church with them. But those same Christians would have to admit they've never invited them. And it's funny how fickle we can be. Someone we may have invited in the past declined, so we haven't invited anyone since. Well, I hate rejection too, but come on. You had a bad meal at a restaurant, so you're never going to eat out again? Your team lost, so you're never going to go to the ballpark again? Had a flat tire, so you're never going to drive again? Some things just don't turn out the way we had hoped. But don't let disappointment immobilize you. Oikos develops patience. Few of us accepted our first invitation to church. Few of us placed our faith in Jesus the first time we heard about him. You might have someone in your oikos like that. Like you, someone who, at least to this point, has never shown interest in church, but life's difficulties eventually expose all of us for who we actually are. People incapable of negotiating life's obstacles without divine help. When your continued prayers and investment intersect with a season of life that reveals their vulnerability, believe me, that conversation will change. So just keep inviting, because you never know when those elements will line up and God will begin to reveal himself in a new way. But make sure your invitations are strategic and regular, not obnoxious. Your oikos needs to feel the warmth of your consistent welcome, not the annoying burden of more guilt. Inspiring them will beat manipulating them as a motivator every single time. And then number 5, prepare to clearly display God's character and to defend your faith in Christ. You know, as a church leader, casting a vision to reach more people is easy, but creating a structure to facilitate that vision is difficult. If the people you lead are not prepared to fulfill the vision you cast, of what value is your vision? That's why we created Laser Church, to focus on a simple structure to encourage a simple lifestyle that will elevate the simplicity of the gospel, which, by the way, is still the only message simple enough to change the world.